You ever really watch someone? Not because they're doing something remarkable, but because something about the way they move through the world pulls at you, tells you there's a story underneath the ordinary. On Sunday mornings, right around 8:45, you can see her on 5th Street. Cold mornings, warm mornings, raining, doesn't matter. She's walking toward the white church on the corner of Maple, same route every single week, for longer than most people pay attention to anything. She's in her early 90s now. Her name doesn't matter for what I'm about to tell you, so I'll just say she buttons her coat all the way to the top, sets her hair on Friday nights the way she's been doing it for 60 years, and walks with the deliberate purpose of someone who knows exactly where she needs to be and isn't about to apologize to anyone for taking up the space. The church is small. Originally, it held 300 people on a Sunday. Now on a good week, maybe 30 show up. The congregation got old. That's what happens in a town where young people leave and don't come back. Most of the people her age stopped coming 10 years ago. Arthritis, hip replacements, grandkids living across the country. Health scares that make you reconsider your priorities, or at least your weekly routine. But not her. Every single Sunday. Rain or shine. 9 o'clock service. 45 minutes, same liturgy, same hymns sung by a smaller choir every year. She sits in the same pew. Third from the front, left side, right side of the left section. She arrives 10 minutes early, removes her coat carefully, folds it beside her, takes out her hymnal and her bulletin, and settles in like she's been doing this her entire life, because she has. That pew means something to her. That pew is a promise. 11 years ago, her husband died. They'd been married for 67 years, spent every single Sunday in that church together, in that pew, holding the same hymnals, singing the same songs, sitting in the rhythm of liturgy, the way some people live in the rhythm of home. On the last Sunday before he went into the hospital, he'd had the heart attack on a Tuesday. This was the Sunday before. He told her something. Simple sentence. The words stuck in her like they were carved there. He said, "I'll meet you there. Always. Every Sunday. Even when I can't be there in the way we want, I'll meet you there." He was talking about God, about faith, about the way that pew was a meeting place that went deeper than just the two of them sitting together. But she heard it different. She heard a promise. A husband's promise to show up. She heard a man who understood that what they'd built together in those pews had weight, that it meant something, that it would outlast his body. So she does what she told him she'd do. She shows up. She sits in the third pew from the front, and on the bench beside her, every single Sunday, there's an empty seat. She doesn't save it officially. She doesn't put anything on it. But she leaves it empty, doesn't sit in the middle. Always sits on the right side of the pew, leaving the left side open. Leave space for a man who's been gone for 11 years, the way you leave space for someone you're still waiting for. She's 93 years old, and she's been keeping this promise for longer than most marriages last. I need to back up. I'm telling you this story the wrong way. The bikers started noticing her about 6 months before anyone decided to do anything about it. There's a motorcycle club that meets on Sunday mornings. Not an official club, just a loose group of riders, men and women, who like to gather before or after their personal business and drink coffee and talk about the week. They started meeting at a parking lot near the church because one of them lives in the neighborhood and one of them likes the quiet of that street on Sunday morning. It's a small parking lot. You can see the church from where they gather. They noticed her routines, week after week, month after month. The same woman in the same coat, walking the same route with the same intensity. One of the bikers is a man who spent 40 years driving long-haul trucks, 40 years listening to nothing but the sound of his own engine and the road underneath him. He's quiet. Has a face that doesn't show much, but sees everything. You develop a certain awareness when you're alone on roads for 4 decades, when you learn to read the smallest details because they can mean the difference between safety and danger. He noticed her first, saw her walking down 5th Street one Sunday morning in March, saw her coat, saw her hair, saw the way she walked, deliberate and uncompromising. He mentioned it to the other riders, said there's an old woman who walks to that church every Sunday, alone, and she never looks left or right. Doesn't seem to notice the world around her. Just walks straight there, like she's keeping time with something internal. They started paying attention after that. On Sunday mornings, when they gathered in their parking lot with their coffee, they'd watch for her. 8:55, give or take a few minutes, she'd come down 5th Street, her navy coat catching the early light. 8:57, she'd climb the steps of the church, each step deliberate, each step the same as the one before it. 8:58, she'd disappear inside. 45 minutes later, she'd come back out, compose herself on the top step, and walk back home the same way she came. One biker, the truck driver, started timing it, not consciously, just the habit of someone who spent a lifetime paying attention to time and distance, to the patterns that hold things together. He'd park his bike a little different on Sundays, give himself a better view of the church entrance. He started noticing things. The way she always wore the same style of coat, always navy or black, always pressed with a crease that suggested she ironed it with attention. The way her purse was small and structured, old leather, probably from decades ago, a bag that gets made once and worn until the day it falls apart. The way she never looked at her phone, never checked her watch, never seemed to be making sure she was on time, just walked like she knew exactly where she needed to be and when, and nothing in the world would change that knowledge. He watched her through all of March. Then, one Sunday in early April, on a morning when the temperature dropped and rain threatened, he saw her slip on the steps of the church, her hand reaching out to catch the railing. She didn't fall, but her face shifted, annoyance, not fear. She straightened her coat and walked inside anyway. 2 Sundays later, on a Sunday when ice covered everything and the world was dangerous in a beautiful way, he watched her navigate that parking lot with the same deliberate steps, choosing her path carefully, but never hesitating. The other bikers were talking about staying home, but she was walking to church. In May, on a Sunday when the cold came back, a bitter, wind-driven cold that shouldn't happen in spring but did, she walked to that church like it was the only important thing happening that day. Because for her, it was. It is. 4 Sundays of real watching. That was how long it took before he decided to do something. But here's the thing, he didn't decide to help her. He decided to understand her. That's the crucial difference. Most people don't even recognize it exists. He came early one Sunday in late April, parked his bike closer to the church, and walked inside. Just sat in the back. Didn't introduce himself. Didn't sing. Just watched. And he saw what I already told you about. The woman in the 3rd pew from the front, sitting on the right side, leaving the left side empty. Saw the way she focused on the service like it was a conversation happening between her and something deeper than the moment, something that had been talking to her for 50 years and would keep talking to her until she died. Saw the way she left that seat empty, not with the exhaustion of habit, but with intention, with respect. After the service, he didn't approach her. He left, got coffee with the other bikers, and didn't mention what he'd seen. But he came back the next Sunday, and the one after that. He was patient. He understood that you don't rush towards someone else's grief. You make yourself present, and you wait. On the 4th Sunday of him coming to the service, she noticed him. Not because he was trying to be noticed, but because she was sharp. 93 years old, and her mind was clear as glass, sharp as the edge of a blade, She saw a man in leather and road dust coming to a small empty church, sitting in the back, not singing, just watching. She knew he was watching her. She didn't know why, but she noticed. And more than that, she understood that he wasn't judging. He was just paying attention. There's a difference. That Sunday after the service, she didn't leave right away. She waited until the pastor had finished his small greeting at the door, waited until the handful of other parishioners had moved on with their mornings, and when the truck driver walked past her pew, heading toward the exit, she spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear, not tentative, not polite in the way people who want something are polite, just direct. "You come here to fix something?" He stopped, didn't have an answer prepared because he hadn't prepared one. He told her the truth. "I come here to watch." That didn't soften anything. Her expression stayed exactly the same, but something in her eyes shifted, like she was evaluating whether that answer made sense. Why? He thought about it. A long moment. Then he said, "Because you're the only person in this church who knows why she's here. The rest of us just show up because it's Sunday and we don't know what else to do. But you know something. I wanted to understand what." She didn't smile, but something shifted in her face. Some small permission. "Sit down," she said, not a question. They sat in the empty church for a few minutes. He didn't try to fill the silence. Eventually, she started talking. Started telling him about her husband. Started telling him about the last Sunday they sat together, how he'd held her hand a little tighter than usual, how he'd looked at that empty space ahead of them and said what he said. She told him that Harold had been a mill worker, that they'd moved to this town in 1962, the year they got married, that they'd raised 2 children in the house she still lived in, that Harold had never once missed a Sunday, not once, not for illness, not for work, not for anything. Harold kept his word by doing it without making a show of it. He just showed up. She told him Harold had died on a Tuesday at 2:30 in the afternoon, that she was holding his hand when it happened, that his last words were to her, not to the family or the doctor. He'd squeezed her hand and said, "You know where to find me. Always." She didn't cry when she told this, didn't get sentimental, just stated the facts like someone reading a contract. Married 67 years. He died 11 years ago. He said he'd meet her there. So she keeps showing up. That's what you do when someone makes you a promise like that. You show up your side of it. You live the promise just as much as you speak it. The truck driver listened. Then he asked her something that seemed simple, but was exactly right. "Do you want company on the walk?" She looked at him like she was reading something written in his face. Then she said, "I want company during the service. Not on the walk. The walk is just me and him. That's our time. But during the service, it would be nice to sit next to someone who understands what we're doing here. That's the crucial moment. That's where you have to understand the difference between being helped and being included." She didn't want rescue. She didn't want someone to feel sorry for her or to think she needed saving. She wanted someone to sit next to her who knew that the empty seat meant something. Someone who understood that showing up is different than fixing. That presence can honor a promise just as much as action. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply understand and stand beside. He told the other bikers what happened. Not all the details. Just the basics. There's a woman who comes to this church every Sunday to keep a promise. She's been doing it alone. She asked if we could sit with her during the service. Not help her. Not fix anything. Sit with her. The response wasn't hesitation, it was understanding. By the second Sunday of them coming as a group, there were 5 bikers in that church. By the third Sunday, there were 8. They didn't coordinate it like a plan. They just started showing up because they understood what it meant. They sat in the pews around her. didn't try to talk to her, didn't intrude on her space, just sat there with their leather jackets and their road-worn hands, sitting in the rhythm of the liturgy, singing the hymns when the moment came, respecting the silence when the moment demanded silence. The church filled with the sound of their voices, rough and honest, singing the same hymns she'd been singing for 50 years. Harold's hymns. Their hymns now. She didn't acknowledge them at first, just let them be there. But I watched something shift over those weeks. Her posture got a little easier. She still left that empty seat beside her. That wasn't changing. That would never change. But she didn't hunch in quite so tight. She'd look sideways at them sometimes, like she was checking to see if they were really there, if she was imagining them. She wasn't. They were there. Every Sunday. Without fail. The church itself came alive in a way it hadn't in years. The wood of the pews, which had been smooth and austere, suddenly held stories. The hymnals, their pages soft and worn, released the smell of decades, that particular smell of old paper and leather binding, the smell of every person who'd ever opened those books and asked for something larger than themselves. The stained glass windows, pale in the early morning light, cast colors across the empty seats, reds and blues and purples falling across wood, across the black leather of motorcycle jackets. Light doing what light does, making sacred spaces out of ordinary moments. After the 5th or 6th Sunday, she started speaking to the truck driver. Little things at first. Comments about the sermon. A question about where he was from. He answered with the same directness she used. From Montana. Spent 40 years on the road. Saw a lot of the country. Learned how to be alone with it. Learned how to listen to an engine the way other people listen to music. Learned that sometimes the best conversations happen in silence. She told him she'd lived in the same house for 53 years. Raised 2 children there. Her son was in Portland now, worked in something with computers. Her daughter was in Seattle, taught high school English. They called on holidays and sometimes sent cards, but mostly it was her and Harold, building a life in the same rooms, in the same routines, in the same pew every Sunday for decades. They'd known their neighbors, hosted dinner parties, went to the library on Wednesday afternoons, had a garden where they grew tomatoes every summer. Harold could talk to anyone about anything. He was the social one, she was the quiet one. He was the reason they had a life beyond just the 2 of them. Then her husband died, and she kept going to that pew anyway, kept walking to that church, kept sitting on the right side of the pew, leaving the left side empty. Did it for 11 years without anyone sitting beside her. Did it not because she expected him to be there, not because she believed he was literally sitting next to her, but because she'd promised. And promises don't end when people die. They just change what they mean. The bikers understood that, all of them, in different ways. The woman who grew up in Norway and still had the accent understood it because her mother had died and she still made her mother's recipes. The man named August understood it because he'd spent 15 years alone with his diabetes, testing his blood sugar every morning, not because it would save him, though it did, but because he'd promised himself he would. The couple who'd been married 30 years understood it because they'd made a promise to each other, and they kept it not out of obligation, but because the promise itself was the thing that held them together. They all understood what it meant to show up for something that mattered. I want you to understand something about this woman. She wasn't tragic. She wasn't a victim who needed rescue. She was fierce. She was someone who decided that a promise meant something, and then she kept it, no matter what. No matter if the church was empty. No matter if she was the only one there. No matter if her family had moved on, and the world had moved on, and everything looked different than it used to. She kept going because she said she would. She kept the promise because Harold kept his. Because love is something you practice. It's a verb. It's something you do over and over, even when the person who made the promise with you isn't there to do it alongside you. The bikers understood that. That's why they didn't try to make it about saving her. They understood that she didn't need saving. She needed company. She needed people to understand that what she was doing wasn't sad or pathetic. It was brave, quiet, stubborn courage that doesn't make headlines because it's just someone showing up, sitting down, and being present to something bigger than themselves. That's the hardest courage there is, not the flashy version, the version that repeats. One Sunday, probably the 8th or 9th week of them coming together, something happened that was small but felt big. They were sitting through the scripture reading, a passage about resurrection and presence and promises kept, when she reached over to the truck driver and touched his arm. Just touched it. He turned his head, and she looked at him, and she said, "I need to tell you something about Harold." They sat through the rest of the service in silence, but after it ended, after the pastor had given his closing blessing and the other parishioners had filed out, the truck driver and the old woman sat in that pew, and she told him about the last time her husband came to that church, the Sunday before his heart attack, what he'd said about meeting her there. He'd died in the hospital on a Tuesday. Doctors and machines and family around him. His heart just stopped. But that last time they were at church together, something was different. He knew something was coming. Maybe not death specifically, but something. And he'd made her a promise. She said, "On the way home from church that day, he held my hand while he drove. He never did that anymore. The arthritis made it hard to do anything but grip the wheel. But he held my hand, and he said, not looking at me, just looking at the road, he said, 'When I'm not here anymore, I need you to keep going there. I need you to sit in that pew and understand that I'm meeting you there, that I always will be. It won't be my body, but it will be me, in the place we made together, in the promise we made together.'" She looked at the truck driver and she said, "I think he knew. I think his body knew his heart was going to stop, and he was trying to tell me how to survive it." The truck driver asked her what she thought Harold meant. She said, "I think he meant that love is bigger than death, that we made something together in all those years and all those Sundays, and it doesn't just stop because the body stops working. It continues somewhere, in the practice of it, in the showing up, in the space we hold open for each other." She said it matter-of-factly, not romantic, not sentimental, just true. The way someone states a fact they've lived with for so long, it's become as real as breath. Then she looked at him and said, "I think he'd like that there are other people here now. I think he'd like that I'm not sitting alone, trying to hold on to something by myself. I think he'd like that his promise got bigger, that it included all of you." The truck driver nodded. He understood what she was saying, that she could still keep her promise and still let other people be part of it. That the empty seat beside her wasn't about exclusion anymore. It was about honoring someone while also accepting company. It was about grief becoming something bigger than grief, about loss becoming something that connects you to other people instead of separating you from them, about a woman in her 90s still keeping a promise she made 11 years ago, and finding that the promise is stronger for being shared. Now I need to tell you something about what it means to keep a promise for 11 years, about what it means to show up in the same place, at the same time, week after week after week, without fail because you said you would. Most people can't imagine it. Most people don't keep anything that long. Jobs change. Relationships end, houses get sold, faith wavers. But promises that are rooted in love and not obligation, promises that you keep because the keeping is the thing itself, not the destination, those promises change you. 11 years is long enough to become who you are. It's long enough that people forget there was a time you didn't keep this promise. It's long enough that a routine sinks into your bones and becomes your identity. She became the woman who walks to church every Sunday, Not because she decided to define herself that way, but because she decided once, and then she just kept deciding it, over and over, until it was true. 11 years of Sundays, over 500 Sundays, 500 times climbing those steps, 500 times sitting in that pew, 500 times leaving that seat empty, 500 times keeping Harold's promise. What that teaches you, what I learned watching her do it, is that love isn't a feeling. It's a practice. It's something you do. It's showing up when it would be easier not to. It's keeping a promise when nobody would know if you broke it. It's sitting in an empty church on a Sunday morning in the cold because you said you would. That's what love is. Not the grand gestures, not the passionate declarations, just the small, repeated choosing to be faithful to something that matters. A month into the bikers coming as a group, the pastor of the church took the truck driver aside after service. He said, "I don't know what changed, but something changed. She seems different, lighter, not happy, I'm not using that word, but like she's not carrying the weight by herself anymore." The truck driver told him the truth. He said, "She's not different. She was always this way. We just showed up to see it." The pastor nodded because he understood. You can be someone's shepherd for years and still not really see them until someone else sits down beside them. You can preach about community and belonging and then not notice that someone in your congregation has been sitting alone for over a decade. But once you notice, once you actually see what's in front of you, it changes everything. The pastor started paying more attention to the empty seats in his church, to the people who showed up faithfully and asked for nothing, to the way presence itself can be a form of healing. The weeks turned into months. By September, when the seasons started shifting, there were usually between 10 and 15 bikers at Sunday service. A woman named Petra, who grew up in Norway and still had the accent, who'd ridden motorcycles since she was 16 and never stopped. A man named August, who was diabetic and always brought hard candies to share. The ones he kept in his leather jacket, the ones he offered before they sat down. A small ritual of caring that nobody had asked him to do, but he did it anyway. A couple, a man and woman who'd been married for 30 years and had started riding together 5 years ago after their kids grew up, who'd realized that being alone on a bike was less lonely than being alone at home. A man who'd been in and out of prison, who'd found sobriety through riding, found community through the road, found purpose when he started showing up on Sunday mornings. A woman who managed a hardware store and loved the quiet of early mornings, who'd found something in those church services that she couldn't find anywhere else. All of them leather and road dust and stories of the open road, sitting together in a small church on Sunday mornings, becoming something like a congregation. The woman started learning their names, started asking them questions after service, asked Petra about Norway, about the mountains she'd ridden through, about whether she ever went back, asked August about his life before motorcycles, about what he did when the road wasn't enough to keep him moving forward, asked the couple about their marriage, about how they'd learned to be together without being able to stay still. She was curious, sharp, funny in the way that people who've lived 9 decades get to be funny, unsentimental, specific, with edges that had been worn smooth by time but hadn't lost their ability to cut through pretense. One Sunday in October, she brought coffee. Just brought it. 2 large thermoses of coffee she'd made at home and some cookies she'd baked. Not store-bought, actual cookies made in her kitchen, each one slightly different, because she didn't measure things exactly anymore. She just knew how much of each ingredient by feel. Set them up on a table in the fellowship hall after service. Said, "If you're going to sit with me, you might as well have something warm. It's the least I can do." The bikers understood what that meant, that she was claiming them, that they were part of her Sunday now, that the promise she kept to her husband had expanded to include them. That grief, when you stop trying to carry it alone, becomes something else, becomes community, becomes a reason for other people to show up. By November, the pew had changed. She still sat in the same seat, third from the front, left side. The seat next to her stayed empty. That never changed. Never would change. But now, there were other people in the pew with her. The truck driver usually sat 2 seats over, where he could hear her voice when she spoke. Petra sat on the end, where she could see the whole room, where her attention could move between the service and the people, between the sacred and the human. August positioned himself where he could see the stained glass windows and the way light moved through them during the service, the reds and blues and purples shifting as the sun climbed higher, as the service moved through its liturgy. The empty seat held more presence than any of them realized. She wasn't any less devoted to her husband's memory. She still left that seat empty, still focused on the service with the same intensity, still carried her old leather purse, that small structured bag that had been with her for so long it was like an extension of her hand, still wore her navy coats, pressed with a crease that spoke of care, still walked to church and back home in the same deliberate way, the same route, the same pacing. Nothing essential about her had changed, but she wasn't alone anymore. And that changed everything about how the world saw her, changed everything about how she saw herself. I want to tell you what it's like to watch someone accept belonging without losing their independence, because most of us get that wrong. We think independence means not needing anything from anyone. But that's not what it is. Independence is knowing what you need and accepting it with full knowledge of your own worth. It's sitting next to someone and not pretending they're not there. It's keeping your promise to your dead husband while also letting the living sit beside you while you do it. It's saying, I will show up for myself, and I will accept that other people show up for me, and I don't have to choose between those two things. She kept that pew, and that empty seat, and that walk to church every Sunday. Nothing changed about the essential shape of her life, but everything changed because now it wasn't solitary anymore. Now it was a practice that included people. Now, when she walked into that church and saw those bikers already seated, waiting for her, their leather jackets and their lives and their stories becoming part of the sacred shape of Sunday morning, something shifted. Not in her. She was already what she was. She'd already become what 11 years of showing up had made her. But in what that means. In what it means to be a woman in her 90s, sitting in a pew you've sat in for 50 years, keeping a promise to a man who died 11 years ago, while a group of motorcycle riders sit beside you and do the same quiet work of showing up. It means you're not alone. It means your promise got bigger. It means that love, real love, expands to include people you didn't expect to let in. That's the story. That's what happened when a biker convoy pulled into the parking lot and decided to watch long enough to understand, not to fix, not to save, not to make someone's life less lonely by doing something heroic and big and public, but just to show up, to sit down, to understand that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for another person is to say, I see what you're doing. It matters. It's brave. Let me do it with you. The bikers still go on Sundays. It's been about a year now since that first morning when the truck driver walked into the church and sat in the back. The woman is 94 now, still walks to church alone, still sits in the same pew, still leaves the empty seat beside her, still keeps the promise. That hasn't changed. That will never change. But now she sits with company. Now her Sunday ritual includes the clinking of motorcycle boots on the wooden floor. Now the church has people in it who came for a different reason than tradition, or childhood, or family obligation. They came because they understood what it means when someone tells you they're going to show up, and then they do. The pastor has noticed the change. The church feels alive in a way it hasn't in years. On some Sundays, There are families who come because they've heard about the woman and the bikers. Not tourists, not gawkers, but people who sense that something true is happening there. Something about keeping promises. Something about showing up. The congregation is still small, but it's growing. Not because the woman or the bikers are trying to recruit anyone, but because people can feel when they're in a place where commitment matters, where love is something you practice, where presence is the ultimate gift. The woman still lives alone. She still makes her own coffee and bakes her own cookies and walks her own route. But now there are people she calls on Monday mornings to tell them something she thought of about the sermon. Now there's a man named August who stops by her house sometimes and brings hard candies and sits on her porch and doesn't say much, but just sits. Now there's Petra, who took her for a ride once, just around the block, and the woman said it was the most alive she'd felt in years, the wind and the engine, and the sense of being part of something wild and present. She didn't become a motorcyclist, but she became part of their world. That's not rescue. That's witnessing. That's understanding that grief and love and devotion don't end when the person dies. They just change shape. They expand. They become something that includes more people instead of fewer. I've spent 40 years on the road seeing the country alone, and I thought that was what strength looked like. Self-sufficiency, independence, not needing anybody. But watching this woman and these bikers, I learned something different. Strength looks like keeping your promise even when nobody's making sure you do. Courage looks like letting other people sit with you while you do something sacred and private and true. And what people only see when they look at leather and engines is a bunch of folks who understand that showing up matters. That presence is a form of love. That you can sit in silence next to someone and do more good than you could do with 1,000 words of fixing or saving or helping. That sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply be faithful to something. Be faithful to someone. Be present to the sacred and mundane all at once. The pew isn't empty anymore, but the seat beside her still is. And I think her husband knows. I think in whatever form a promise takes after death, he knows that she kept it, and that now she doesn't keep it alone. Now, the empty seat holds all the love that everybody in that pew is bringing to the moment, all the quiet courage, all the presence, all the small, ordinary, impossible commitment to showing up on a Sunday morning and sitting with someone you barely know because you understand why they came. That's what his promise became. More than a memory of a man who died, a living thing, a practice, a community. A reason for 11 people to put on their leather jackets and climb the steps of a small white church and sit in silence and do the sacred work of being there.